everybody. Welcome back to the Self Leadership Lab, a place where we talk about all things self leadership so we can lead ourselves, so we can show up and help and lead others. Today, I am pleased to have David Ask on the show. David, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us what you're all about?
Man, I'm really glad to be here, and thanks for having me. I just the brief conversation we had before really kind of set me on fire here. So thanks for having me here. So, I'm a guy just like you, right? I'm leaning in, figuring it out, and I love the. I heard somebody say that everything rises and falls on leadership. And so I feel like, when I saw your podcast and of course reached out to have a conversation, I thought, man, this guy is touching on something that I think is largely misunderstood in so many ways and so on. But I like that you're passionate about this, and so am I. And so to answer your question, right, who am I? So I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I moved here from a little town in Minnesota as a vocalist. Ended up over the course of my time here, recorded a few records. I'm actually releasing a new song. And well, let me back up. I just released a new song this year. Everybody knows the band Journey, and I released, of course, their famous song "Open Arms," but I recorded it in English and Italian, and I'm releasing the full Italian version next year, and so on. Having fun with music, but I'm an entrepreneur. I do a little bit of real estate and real estate investing. I've got a product in Home Depot and Lowe's. That's the first thermostat guard in the world that has a combination lock, so you don't need to worry about losing that tiny key. In fact, I just licensed a new unit called the Lockbox Pro to the company called Lennox, which is like a large, HVAC distributor, kind of in the wholesale channel. I'm passionate about fatherhood. I've been married 26 years. My son Parker is 20 years old. My daughter is 19. And I'm grateful to be surrounded by a lot of people who have, poured into me and helped me, navigate life as a 51-year-old.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, welcome to the show. And as we talked about earlier, you're very passionate about leadership. But before we get into the whole leadership discussion, I will say, you don't know this about me, but I was a tuba major. I went to conservatory for tuba, and
Awesome.
I love music. And we're gonna put the link on here, but check David out because it was so cool. I went, I played it for my wife. I was like, listen to this guy. It's like such a great. So you're doing a great job, and you're doing great. And then on your company with the Lockbox, I know my wife's going to listen to this podcast, but I don't want her to get one because she always wants to make the house so cold, and I'm a cold natured person. So if she locks me out on the thermostat, I'm screwed. But no, that's a really cool product, and we'll put the link in that too for people who are interested in that. And congratulations on that and getting that out.
Oh, thank you.
Especially with the distribution that you've got with the big box stores.
Super grateful. Thank you. Yeah.
But yeah, on the topic of leadership, we talked briefly, and something that you're passionate about is grit. And so define what grit means to you, and let's talk about that from the leadership perspective, because that's one topic I haven't brought up yet on this the show, and I certainly think it's a big element to the action that we all take and how long we keep it up, and it throws the emotions, the motivation, all the little buzzwords that are out there that don't last. But grit lasts. It's part of your ethos. It's part of your bios. It's what you do every single day, regardless if you feel like it or not. That's my definition of it. I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah. So it's fun, when people, on a very casual level, when you hear someone referring to someone else, I mean, that guy's got some grit, right? He's like, initially the first reaction is, all right, let's go chase some, let's go do it, that kind of thing. And, we mentioned the Angela Duckworth book, Grit. She wrote the book on grit, right? There's a lot of books out there that talk about resiliency and grit and so on. And, what's interesting, though, is I think that, I'll put it this way. My buddy Greg Yates said his biggest fear in life is to be successful at the wrong things. So I think that in our culture, there's this, you've heard the term hustle culture, right? There's just this idea that we just got to be really busy. We got to be going after it. We got to be climbing that hill, jack of all trades, just really, getting after it. And I think that, if grit is misunderstood or replaced, maybe with identity, right? Maybe with, you're confusing some things like, why am I doing this? And what am I really standing on, to make these decisions, that I'm spending my time in a worthy manner and so on. And so it can be kind of complicated. So I like to think of grit as being, kind of, well, maybe what the word says, right? There's something under my feet that's gritty, like it gives me traction. And what I think is fascinating is I think another word. So Angela Duckworth, let me back up. She describes the word grit as, doing something for a long period of time because, whatever you're fighting for is worth it, right? And that might be, 2.5 hours in a marathon or 6 hours if you're me. And, or it might be, I'm getting my health back in shape. It's a whole year's worth of, doing hard things or whatever. It just depends on what the situation is. But I think what's interesting is I think that sometimes you can replace the word grit with the word steadfastness. And I think that word really kind of reorients our thinking as to if I say I have grit under my feet, right? What would each of those little stones, right? Those little sandpaper stones, what would they represent? And I think the word steadfastness is almost a better word to help understand because if I'm going to do something and lay my hands to something, be passionate about something, right? That the word passion comes from the word suffer. If I'm willing to suffer for something, well, why? Like, what is it that's actually compelling me to do the, X, Y, and Z and stick with it? Well, it's really kind of comes back to our values, right? I value something, therefore, I'm willing to lean into the wind. I'm willing to climb that hill. And so I think that quite often, grit is really representative of, those things that are kind of under our feet that give us that traction, that help us to understand, why we're doing something, that compel us. Maybe how about this? That would maybe even pull us forward as opposed to push us. And I think sometimes it's both and. But I think that, it's kind of messy, it's kind of sticky, but I really think for me personally, it goes back to values.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that quote that your friend said. I'm going to butcher it. So give it to me again. The friend about, I don't want to be successful at,
yeah, he said, my biggest fear is to be successful at the wrong things.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the most missing elements when we discuss grit and we talk about determination or steadfastness, whatever word that fires you up and gets you that idea. Because, and I wrote a book essentially about this, the easy hard versus hard. So if you're chasing that easy hard, the stuff that doesn't matter to you or the stuff that you don't really want to be doing, then all the grit in the world isn't going to leave you fulfilled. It may push you. And I love the way you said sometimes you need to be pulled, sometimes you need to be pushed. Well, I don't know which one's positive or negative in this, but I guess it depends on your frame of reference. But if you're always feeling like you got to pull something and you don't really want to do it, that's when you got to question, like, are you wasting your grit? Do you have any thoughts on that about having grit on the wrong things?
Oh man. Yeah. And I mean, really, I don't think there's anybody who can't relate to the fact that, you've spent yourself working really, really hard at something and you're like, dang, that was a complete waste of time. I'll be honest, that might have been a person, right? That might have been, I'm going to college or I'm going into some vocation or something because my parents want me to do it. And I'm just beavering in here and putting my head down and denying my own, having that internal war going on because I'm trying to please somebody else. So my grit, in essence, and whatever you want to call it, I had to have something under my feet to grab traction to keep going, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that, if we're going to, turn grit into a really positive, frame of reference for ourselves, I think that, starting with your values, starting with who you are and what you value most of all in this life has to come before, your why. So if we think of grit being my why, which I think is pretty close there. I'm not saying I'm an expert on this, but I really think that you need to have some self-awareness to understand What does someone like me value most of all in this life? I talk a lot about core values. I work closely with my buddy who's a clinical psychologist, Dr. Andy Garrett, and he really introduced me to the core values in a way that I thought was so practical. And sometimes, if you're in a corporate setting or something, hey, we're going to do a core values exercise, and figure out what our core values are, and then somebody slaps it on the wall and nobody ever looks at it again. Well, here's what's fascinating is if you, for instance, the one that Dr. Andy does is, there's, I don't know, 75 or 80 potential core values in the English language, right? So you put a checkbox next to the ones that kind of resonate with you. You narrow that down to 20, narrow that down to 10, and then narrow that down to 5, and you prioritize those words, for yourself. Then what? You get to define what that word is and why it's meaningful to you. Nobody's going to tell you, what you should or shouldn't think and that kind of thing. And here's what's interesting. If you're in a room full of 100 people and you all do a core values assessment, they're going to be largely different. There's going to be some overlap, right? But the definitions of those words, right? Because, we all have kind of a different, interpretation of things, is going to be slightly different, nuanced. And then why is it important to me? Man, I like to ask that question. What does your core, I'm talking that plumb line, the truest, deepest essence of who you are, what does your core happen to value most of all in this life, right? And so, one of the things that I do, and when I work with Dr. Andy, is to help people start defining those things that make them them. It's kind of a little complicated, and sometimes in a lot of ways it's very practical. So a lot of times, people would confuse, for instance, values, convictions, and virtues, right? Well, a conviction and a value are different. Conviction is what I believe is right and wrong. A value is a matrix that I make decisions through. So I say I value these things, and now I have an opportunity or an obstacle. I filter it through these values, and I say, well, I'm going to say yes to this or no to this, right? Or I've predetermined I'm going to say yes and no to some things. And then a virtue, though, is different. It's like, what type of an impact do you want to have, right? That whole dent in the universe thing. What type of an impact does David Osk want to have on Bobby Shelton that I just met 10 minutes ago? Whether you or my son, right? I mean, I hope there's some overlap there, right?
Right.
It's not the same, but man, I sure don't want to be a different person with you than I am my own family. And so I think it's really important to understand, back to the grit word, it's really, self-awareness is such an important part of that, in order to establish what's under your feet and what are you fighting for.
Mm. Yeah, the whole core values for someone too, and so many of those are outsourced. Like the example you use, you go to college because your parents want you to, you do this because of whatever the what is,
Yeah.
you start outsourcing those core values, and it's very hard to understand it. And this really relates to the self-leadership concept, because self-leadership is all about who, the me,
Yeah.
the core, whatever word you want. And once we lose sight of that, and then when you further that by taking yourself out of who you are, you're outside of your core values, and then you start grinding or practicing grit. Because, I mean, let's be honest, we could just type in self-help right now on Google and probably get all kinds of people that says work hard or do this. But if you're doing it on the wrong thing, and it's especially not if it's to your values and your core,
Yeah.
and again, the more I outsource my own core, I saw this in my own life, I did stop showing up for others. But it was kind of the opposite. I would show up for others the way I wanted to be seen. But at the same time, I was always at conflict with my own core and my own feelings. And so therefore, all this grit and determination. I mean, most people are wild. In fact, I went to a fly fishing group that I hadn't seen in a while. So some people I hadn't seen in a couple of years, handed out my book, talked about the concept a little bit. And they're like, wow, I never knew that about you. Well, in some ways, I'm talking myself out of it as I speak here to you. My core is to be kind. That's a core value of mine. One of the things I want to do is make someone's life better every single day. Well, what I was finding is this dichotomy I had with the way I was feeling inside, not knowing who I was allowing me to do that to you. But when I came home it might have been a different story because I had the protection, the love of my wife. And, it's one of those things that I most regret about that period of my life, or most learned from, let's say, because I don't think you should regret, because it taught me to where I am today. But at the same point, that core is so valuable. And I like the way you describe it. Do you find when you're working with people that they find that their core values have been delegated or misplaced or lost? Is that a
Yeah,
common thing?
yeah, and I would say that I would, man, that's probably 90 to 95% of people that I talk to have never really even heard the term. They have a generic understanding about be really nice to people and don't be a jerk. And if you have some strengths, well, try to use your strengths, which is great. And I would say, yeah, be nice, don't be a jerk. But what's fascinating though is if the more granular, you get, and just understanding yourself, it's funny, the less you actually think about yourself, because you understand you were made, for a purpose. You're made, to bless other people, period. If you are, the term narcissist, right? If you think that your core values are all about your happiness and pleasure and all this kind of stuff, you'll never find it. In fact, just the opposite. You will find depression and anxiety if your whole life is narcissistic and you're just trying to please your every whim. And on the opposite side, though, is if your life focus, after gaining some self-awareness on who you are and how God put you together, is focused on the flourishment of other people, you will find both, right? You will find happiness, you will find joy, you will find fulfillment. And it's because, we were designed that way. We cannot operate outside of our design. So I'm going to jump into the deep end of the pool real quick here. So one of the things that I think is really fascinating, and of course in our country, right, it's really popular to think, well, we didn't choose our skin color, our eye color, our taste buds, things like that. And I'll go a step further here. You didn't make you, right? You had no choice in your DNA. You had no choice in your skin color. Nothing. Well, neither did I. Nobody has a choice in who they are. You don't have a choice in your own personality. We like to think that, I'm developing and all this kind of stuff. And yes, there are factors that, influence us. There's no getting around it. But the funny thing is when children, are coming out of the gate, right? When they're, I don't know if do you have kids?
I do not know.
Yeah. So, I've got two, right? But you'll get the point either way. When they're just a matter of days or weeks and months old, like you can tell so acutely how, no pun intended, how different they are from their sibling. Their little spirit, their little essence is so different. And when kids are growing up, when they're 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 years old, they're not thinking, about being authentic, like us sophisticants, right?
Right.
Right. They're not thinking about, well, I need to express my authenticity and all the bull crap. They're just being themselves until what? Until life happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until somebody hurts them, until somebody marginalizes them, until somebody punches them in the face, right? Metaphorically or literally, until someone teases them, until there's neglect, until there's trauma. And then what happens? Well, we start to kind of play a role. We walk into a room because we don't know any different, and we do what works. So if I act in a certain way, right, I do the dance, whatever that might look like, I get the applause. And if I act another way, right, I might get disciplined or mocked or, hurt or whatever it is, right? We kind of just start doing what works while expressing some of our authenticity and things like that. And what's fascinating though is, as you've probably heard the term self-actualization, when teenagers start pulling away from their parents and acting the fool and just getting all buck wild. Well, that doesn't really stop, until they're, early 20s typically, right? We're trying to figure out, where do I start and stop? And where do my parents and my friends start and stop? Where's this boundary? And, when I bump into reality, what hurts, what doesn't, what works, what doesn't. And you start to find out, hopefully, because you've been raised, right? Those things that start bubbling up in you that are unique to who you are.
Hmm.
What's really happening during that time? You're identifying right? We're writing it down. We use that word identity all the time, like it's something you achieve or you become somebody. Well, I have all these accolades, so at least I'm not a nobody. Well, no, identity is just writing down authenticity. And guess where we get the word authenticity from? Author, right?
Mm,
God in his providence, and again, you get to decide what you believe about him, but nobody can deny the fact that I didn't make me and neither did you. So we have to submit to what reality is, and I would submit that we are fearfully and wonderfully made.
mm.
And that when life happens and we start shutting down and we're getting wounded and anxious and all that stuff, that's a clue. That's just a clue that something is wrong, and that there's something that's scared inside of us, that we feel inadequate. And what do we need? We need what we needed when we were little. We need to know that we were the object of our parents' delight. We need to know that they are in our corner. They need to, raise us. What does that mean? Cause us to rise into and unto a life of self-awareness and uniqueness and mission that is unique to our DNA and our wiring and all that kind of stuff. But when that stuff is neglected or not even thought about in most cases, I heard somebody say, we become human doings and not human beings.
Yeah.
And it's, we kind of play the stupid role. And man, it's the alternative to that, to be named, to be loved, to be validated, to be called forth right into our own uniqueness. Man, that's transformative.
Oh man, there's so many things that you just said there that I want to talk about, but the main one, and remind me if I get on a diet. A lot of times my brain works faster than my mouth.
No,
But
good.
I want to talk about this whole child development in a second. But something you said rang so true to me. In the Bible, there's two greatest commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, treat your neighbor as yourself. Right. So you talk about this love of God, being in the image of God. And I find, and this is actually going to be a good segue. This is how my brain and my mouth don't work
Yeah,
together.
let's do it. Yeah.
But when we place another God in front of us, as a child, at that time you don't know, you're not around controversy, you're not around tension because your parents love and let you be this. Well, that's what God does. The more once we replace that God, we can't love our neighbors because either we don't love God or we have a false God or something like that. And in my case, I couldn't love my neighbor because of the God part, but also because I didn't love myself. Because it says love your neighbor as yourself, right? And to me, I find this very interesting, especially in relation to children, because at that 1 to 6 or whatever time frame you gave there, they're fairly protective. They're just around love, and so they probably love their parents. They probably don't know about God and that sort of thing in the level that our brains do as adults. But at the same time, they're surrounded, so they can therefore love themselves a little more. And they can treat others with, once that controversy comes and some guy questions their faith or questions what they know as existence. I know that's kind of a ramble, but to me it makes sense. I do find it very interesting, and I like your point about children, because I often think about, where did we replace our identity? And you're probably right, because I think about my own life. Where did I stop acting differently? Well, if I got made fun of. I was a chubby kid, people would make fun of me. I found out very quickly that if I was funny and self-deprecating, people wouldn't make fun of me because I was doing it before they got the chance to do it, right? And to this day, that self-deprecation creeps into my life a lot, which leads to self-doubt, self-anxiety, all that stuff. But talk a little bit more, as someone who had children, and I haven't, to observe this. I find that very interesting. So like in your own children, if you want to share, or children others you observe, like where do you see that identity change? And again, and for child, they're kind of stuck, right? You're stuck in your class, you're stuck with your siblings. You can't really find, I don't want to say groupthink, but you can't find others who will support, love, and allow you to be who you are. And then I think that's why you said in your 20s. So take all that rambling that I just put out there and see if you can make sense of it for the audience.
Well, so here's something we got to be really, really just painfully clear about, right? We live in a broken world, so there's not. I mean, there's no utopia here. We're never going to be whole. We're never going to be home, right? I mean, this is. I don't care what anybody says. yes, we need to be heading in that direction. And yes, there's, whatever you want to call it, right? There's growth, there's healing, there's redemption, there's, discovery, all that kind of stuff. And absolutely, we need to be about it, right? I mean, we need to be heading in the right direction because that's our ultimate home, I believe. But I think that, as someone who, I grew up in a really, great family. I mean, there's dysfunction like everybody else's family, right? At the same time, everybody has to, self-actualize. You have to experience and gain an understanding and a vocabulary, to understand, all of these, the progressions in life, and who am I and why am I doing the things that I'm doing, and all that kind of stuff. And again, I do think though it kind of starts with a bit of awareness with regards to submitting to what reality is. And what's fascinating is that I think that how about this? You talked about anxiety and different things like that. And I heard Dr. Andy talking about this idea that even the word disorder, it comes from, like, if we say we have a mental disorder, eating disorder, or whatever that is, it's disordered. It's out of order. So what I think is fascinating is if we get things back into order, and again, my view, and I have a pretty staunch view of this, is that God is good, right? He is allowing a chaos in our world. I mean, we could go into that. There's some pretty good reasons behind it. I don't know the ultimate reasons, right? But we know he cares because he came, right? Here we are celebrating Christmas next week. We couldn't find him. He came to find us. So if we start with the fact that God created all of the beauty and the people around us, and he came to find us to enter into our story, it means there's a larger story going on here. And so when I understand too that he said, right, I mean, you mentioned love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's not a suggestion. There are no suggestions in scripture. It's a command. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Why? Because when we get things in the right order, right, and I understand that he is good, that he is for me like a hurricane, that I am made in his image, and so is the homeless man down the street, so are you, so is my son. Well, all of a sudden, I look at everybody around me with a new set of values, right? That they have ultimate worth. They're not just worthwhile or they're worth something. They have ultimate worth. And when I treat not only myself like that, right, but I treat you like that, and I treat Parker and Kate and Lisa like that. And again, all the brokenness, woven in, man, what an orderly and a beautiful progression to life. Then the what that we do, the context, right, of what we do for a living, all that kind of stuff starts to make sense. But if I get those things disordered, and I think that my identity about accomplishments, which I've done, is really above God, right? That I need to somehow impress my wife by being a human doing and not a human being. And she's not going to love me unless I have all these accolades and just be a total butt kicker as far as the world goes, right? And get some applause. Well, then she's going to be like, well, who's this guy? Like, why is he so frantic and running around like a chicken with his head cut off? And so there's so many things that we can get disordered. So when we start with the premise that God is good, that he has come to pursue us, that he has made you and me and everybody else in his own image, and that love, and that's, by the way, that's not, I'll say it this way, I live in the South, right? It's not just, I love you and love is love and all the, no, love looks like something very orderly. Love can look like war, right? Love can look like something very severe, but it's with truth at the center of it. So there's a progression to things that if we just follow along with, and then again, in all of that, identify how God made us unique to enter into this larger story, as part of our story, creating the larger story. It's like, holy moly, that starts to look beautiful. That starts to look freeing. It starts to look empowering. I mentioned at the beginning of the show here, there's something pulling us forward, right? It's like we're tethered into eternity. But there's also some things under our feet. We have some agency. We have autonomy. I get to get up in the morning, and choose you this day whom you will serve. Am I going to serve myself and my fear and my anxiety and everything else? Or am I going to serve the larger story here, whose name is love? Man, that looks powerful. That looks like some days I'm drawing out my sword and I'm kicking somebody's hind end, right? Like who's might be
Right.
wanting to hurt my family. I don't know. I mean, whatever the situation might warrant, but it's not weakness, right? It's not timidity. It's not over the top, some weird agenda, Braveheart kind of a thing, all the time. But it's someone who understands who he is and who he isn't. The mission is clear. Your values are clear, and and so on. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me, and I love the connection that I'm going to make on that, is that like all that love that you spoke about, all the grit we talked about earlier, it's all based on your values. Because if you've misplaced those, using again miss again, right, the word, it takes you so far away from it. And so that's why I think so many of these like grit, determination, motivational speakers that are out there, it's all there because no one's looking at the core, no one's looking at the what. And in your case, you're saying the who. It's who and what you do, and that it's sad to me as I observe people in this misplaced identity. And when we talked about children, and then you said you start figuring it out in your 20s, but man, I live in the DC metro area, and there is so much misplaced identity, and it's all about two parties that are going to take money out of your wallet and do things that you like sometimes and don't like sometimes, but yet people are willing to lose friends. They're willing to do everything, and it becomes their identity. And so they're so working hard on getting that dogma out and that belief of this, that they've lost the ultimate love. Now, sure, they're doing good things for their, but it's kind of like a false love, and it's a false grit. And I don't know if you mentioned you marathon 6 hours. I think that was a joke. I don't know if it's true or not, or if you tried.
I've never done it, but it probably would take me 6 hours.
But like if you're running a marathon and you have grit in your sock, you're going to get a blister. But if you have grit on the ground, it's going to allow you to do what the marathon's there to do. It's going to allow you to propel yourself forward, friction, all that stuff, right? Yeah. So maybe let's explore this for a second, if you're willing. Maybe some of this misplaced values is causing the wrong grit. And when you get a blister, sometimes you're like, you just try harder. Oh, I'm doing it wrong. I'm doing it wrong. Well, no, maybe your values are causing your chafing or your, I don't know. What do you think about that? I know that's a crazy idea.
So, to your point with the blister, how many times have we made a decision on something? It started to go poorly and we doubled down. Yeah. Right? We're like, oh, I'm going to force this one. I don't care if it's, your date. I talked to a guy the other day, and he dated somebody, and he said, yeah, David, it was like dating cocaine. He goes, this girl was just off the chain, wild and crazy. And he said, I knew that I should have avoided her like the plague, because he was not following, his conscience, and he doubled down. And I'm just to save he's actually coming out with a book here soon, but to save his story, I'm not going to go any deeper there. But he told me, he said, he didn't follow his values, and he found out why you really want to do that, and he found out in a very harsh way. And it's so, but we've all been there, right? I don't care if it's a business you're starting and you're just bleeding cash, and you're just all your friends hate you, and you're like, I got to make it work because it's an identity piece. I can't be a failure. Oh, you know what? You tried something, it just wasn't a good fit. You learn something, you move on, right? It's so to your point, the blister, can be a real horrible emotional, scar, because we've doubled down because we didn't, our values were misplaced, or we didn't have any.
Yeah. That whole doubling down on the wrong thing. I say a lot of times, you got to give yourself permission to quit. Just like you got to give yourself permission to start, be kind, all those things, but sometimes quit. In this culture, everyone's like quitters, winners never quit. Well, that's the stupidest thing ever. Like if someone was diabetic and they quit drinking 5 sodas a day, we'd applaud them for that. So that's quitting. It's funny how we do this, but yeah. And it's also very, maybe it's ego. Maybe it's this misplaced identity that I can make this work. I can do this. And again, a lot of people quit too soon, right? You know,
Sure.
they're one workout away from having this breakthrough, or they're 1 hour of reading to break through on whatever book or academic
Yeah.
thing they're doing. So I'm not saying quit, just giving you carte blanche. So everyone listening, I'm not saying that. But really analyze it. You said self analysis earlier, or self evaluation. Two things I write about. You've got to put those in your life, because you got to. Sometimes taking action. I used to think that taking no action was better than taking the wrong action. And I've rethought that over the years, because I think sometimes taking the wrong action is exactly what you need, but only if and only if you've got that self-evaluation, that self-awareness, that self-presence. Again, all the self-leadership things. There's a lot of leadership theories out there, but it ultimately comes down to self, because regardless of the standard definition of leaders getting others to do what they don't want to do, well, you're still the one doing it. So lead yourself.
Hey, you know, one thing I was thinking as you were saying that. So here's something I think is really fascinating. Again, back to the way we were designed. You know, even in the Bible, right? It says, "In the counsel of many, there's safety."
Mm-hmm.
So part of self leadership is being willing and able to say, "Hey, I don't know what I don't know. I'm not sure how to do this. I'm not sure if I'm making the right decision. I need a bit of a board of directors here to help me, navigate this." So I think part of self leadership is humility. And here's what I think is interesting about humility, by the way. We often think that, we might witness somebody that we think is humble, when what's really going on is they're just sad. They're depressed.
Mm-hmm.
They might be the most quiet one in the room, or they might walk around not being very noticed or something because they're just sad. There's something going on there. But humility is a chosen place from a position of strength, right? If someone walks into the room and they're really important and they go take the lowest seat, right? That's humility. But if someone who is, the janitor or whatever else you want, whatever you want, however you want to describe that, and they go take the lowest seat, well, okay, nobody thinks anything of it. So I really feel like that again, back to kind of the self-awareness thing. It's like, man, I need to understand that if a decision needs to be made, again, Dr. Andy goes, "I'm just the man for the job. Get out of my way." Like, there needs to be a sense of competence and confidence when you're making a decision, because there's grace on the back end if you didn't make the right one. Okay, we learn, we move on, and so on. But at the same time, I think that there's so much wisdom and humility, really, in just saying, Bobby, I don't know how to do this right now. Whether it's it might be an argument I'm having with my wife, or a parental situation, or a business decision. You know what? I'm going to call a few guys and who I respect, right? I'm not going to call. By the way, I always tell my son Parker, he started a junk removal hauling business, and he's doing several things. I love his friends. They're great guys, and they would take a bullet for him and he would take a bullet for them. But guess what? They're 20 years old. They don't know anything. So I joke with them. I'm like, dude, they're dumb as rocks. I like kind of, joking with him. But I said, if you're going to ask for advice, go ask for advice from someone who's 10 years older, or 20 or 30 years older, who's been there, done that. But don't go to your friends and ask them for advice when they're kind of on the same level as you. So I think there's wisdom and humility and understanding, I don't know what I don't know, and I might need some help with this one.
Yeah, yeah. I tell you, I'm 47, and I at 47 realize how little I know about anything.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I'm supposed to be a subject matter expert on leadership. I got a doctorate in it, and so everyone. But I tell you what that taught me is how little I know about anything. I mean,
Yeah.
I've saved everyone 3.5, 4 years out of the aggravation of the APA formatting, all that stuff. What it teaches you, just look at things objectively. Like you talked about this earlier, you probably don't even remember, it was a while ago. The empathy, like the empathy you have in others, and then also learn from them, because there are people. I never understand these people, like you said, who walk in and because they've done X, Y, and Z, they think they get the highest seat, to use your same analogy. Because all those other people in the room, I guarantee you, there's someone who's a better bread baker, a better father, a better driver, you name it. This is not the be all and end all. You might be at the top of your field here. So I like that whole humility thing. And I think it does go into the way and you bring a very interesting thing. I've never thought about a humble person being depressed. And as someone who's kind of recovering and working on that through myself, I'm going to be more aware of that, because sometimes you do see people quiet and you're like, oh, that guy's got it together. Well, maybe they need a hug. Maybe they need you to go and ask them for advice. Cause that's another thing too. People love, like your sons. I mean, those friends love to give the advice. They don't know what the situation is. I mean, like I said, they
just want to help, but yeah.
Yeah. Everyone wants to help, but at what limit does that then replace your identity to always be the guy who knows, this, and always, we all have those friends, right? It's like if I want to know what I'm doing wrong, I'll call Jim or I'll call whatever. And if I have a friend named Jim, I apologize. I just threw that out. But so it is very interesting. And man, we have covered grit, we have covered self-empathy. I mean, we've covered so much. This has been a very interesting conversation. What else do you want to talk about in this vein? What other thoughts are in your head right now that we can
well, really, as we're kind of wrapping things up here, I like the I'll maybe just leave you with this here. So my favorite quote, and I usually mention this, for whether I'm on a podcast or whatever else, is by Benjamin Disraeli. And, he's the former PM of England back in the 1800s. And he says, the greatest good you can do for another is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own. And I feel like if there's anybody that's kind of captured, in a phrase, my mission in life, and I'm saying my mission in life since I was young, I just didn't know what it was until, I gained some self-awareness. But one of the things that absolutely, just turns my crank is when I get to know somebody and I get to know their little picadillos and, just what causes them to rise and shine and, get after it and just light up, is I like to point those things out. And I really believe that the best thing we can do as friends, as, of course, I'm writing a book for dads, is really that. It's how can I mine for gold in someone else and shine a spotlight on the things that God wove into them before they were born, by the way, and call those things out, and validate those things, and just to tell someone, right? Hey, I saw these things in you the other day, and I just want you to know they're really, really good. And I think that's ultimately what the human heart is longing for, right? That's what love looks like to me. For some other people, it might be, acts of service or various things, right? Because they're different. But for me, I like to go for the jugular. I like to notice things in somebody that other people don't. And by the way, this is my, not to get weird here, but I'm gonna do this for you. So I want to say that your desire to uplift other people and bring insights in a very humble way, right? Here you are with a doctorate, and you didn't mention that until, whatever, 5 minutes ago. You are acting and with a sense of, how about this? Inadequacy? Well, join the club. And I love the fact that you care so much for other people that you're willing to talk about a subject. How about this? You're willing to suffer, right? That word passion, for a subject that is meaningful to you. And a lot of people, guess what? They don't show up, right? They don't have the guts to show up and to do it messy and to do it in their way and not be comparing themselves to Joe Rogan or whoever else, right? Yeah. So I like the fact that you've got the grit, the wherewithal, the passion to show up, have real meaningful conversations, but do it in a way that you would do it, right? And not try to be somebody else. So thanks for having me.
No, thanks for saying that. That's very kind, because so when you throw yourself in this arena, everyone wants to give you advice, unsolicited, solicited, you name it. And that's one of the things that, it's hard, especially on SoloCast. You put that microphone in front of you. I mean, interacting with you has been a complete pleasure. I mean, you're insightful, you're energetic, but I love what you said about seeing what stokes someone else, because it can be the most boring, uninteresting topic to me at all. But when I see someone's face light up and
Yeah.
that joy. And that's what we need more in this world. We have too many people beating you down. I don't like the way you dress. I don't like your hair. You wouldn't believe the hair comments I get. I find them hilarious
Yeah.
because
Yeah, you got great hair.
to me it's just hair. But again, what if that lights you up, then come at me, you know? I mean, and we need more of that. We need more of that in society, because until we can like truly accept and empathize and get to the root of love, which is what I believe self-leadership's about. I believe that's what all leadership's about. It's not a title, it's not a position, it is the way you interact with every human being. So soak that in.
Well, and one other comment there. So I think that, have you ever heard of the Spain study?
No.
It's so you know, like when like people say that person has a good energy, right? Or they, you know, like, well, apparently now there's this cage or whatever you can put people in, and you can test the energy signature that comes off their body, right? Everything has a frequency. This sounds kind of woo-hoo kind of stuff, but it's quite practical. And so here's a fascinating thing. When you would think that the energy signature would be the highest when someone is either, you know, showing or receiving love, or maybe sex or anger or rage or something like that. You know what the highest energy signature is off of someone's body? It's when they are communicating something that they care passionately about in an authentic way.
Hmm.
So in all reality, authenticity, and this kind of proves my point even with the book on some level. It's like, it's top down. It's author, you know, who give us our authenticity. And when we understand who we are, this is something Dr. Andy shared with me, it gives you a sense of authority in your life, right? You start removing the question marks. You know, you start removing uncertainty and replacing it with certainty. And it can be very practical, right? Like my strengths and how I want to apply those things, what type of impact I want to have, the things I believe that are right and wrong, my values, what gives me goosebumps. You know, you start identifying all of those things. Well, what are you doing? You're creating certainty. And when you express that in a really authentic way to who you are and not try to act like somebody else, it's amazing how you feel your energy rise, right? I'll be honest, like there have been moments even in our conversation where I feel like my hands are tingling because I'm like, you know, there's a clue, like I'm passionate about this. But guess what? Everybody else feels the same thing from you. And so I think that, you know, I have it on my board over here. The glory of God is man fully alive. I think that was, who said that? Somebody else will know here who's listening pretty quickly. But it's like, well, what does that really mean? Man, chip away all the nonsense, operate inside of your uniqueness to the glory of God, and you're going to feel, you know, fully alive. And I think that's the goal.
Man, I tell you, that is some power. I love it. I love everything you just said. I didn't know about this Spain study, but I'm definitely gonna look into it, because I definitely think too, going to just to wrap it up with all the grit and everything, you know, because like you said, when you come alive and you're not as tired, and the hours and the dedication, if you're truly out there struggling on something and you hate it, it's probably the wrong thing. Because you ask these world-class marathoners who go out and run, especially these ultra marathoners, which I'm just mesmerized by. To them, it's not pain. Now, sure, there's physical pain in part of it, but it feeds them because it's exactly what they want to be doing. So that grit, it becomes easier. If you're really grinding and struggling or suffering, it's probably not grit. It's probably misplaced identity, misplaced motivation, misplaced direction in your life. So, man, and I gotta apologize before we get out of here. You pronounce your name's Osk. I said David. I asked you at the beginning.
It's all right.
I certainly apologize. And you know, maybe Joe Rogan wouldn't have done that, but no. Well, David, I do thank you. I love your insights. You briefly mentioned it, your book. I will, when it comes out, I will promote that. I can't wait to read it, even though it's about fatherhood. You told me earlier, I'm not a father, but man, your passion and your just excitement in life makes me want to learn about fatherhood from you. So,
man, thank you.
I hope everyone here got something from this. I mean, we covered a whole gamut of everything, and we did this on purpose. David's like, "Hey, we're just gonna have this conversation. We didn't really have a other than for 5 minutes before this." So, lovely conversation, and you know, maybe we'll have you back at some other time. We could be a little more structured, because you're kind of like me. We'll chase rabbits all day long, and
All good.
we'll draw it together. But What any last words? Are you good? We can get out, give.
Oh man, yeah, I'm just glad to be here. So yeah,
Oh man, I
genuinely
love it.
thank you and
I
appreciate it.
love it. Well, thank you so much. And for all of you listening, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Until next time, I'm Bobby Shelton. Keep leading yourself. Find that joy. Find something that we talked about today to lead you so you can be there and lead others. Everyone, have a wonderful week. Thanks for listening.